Right here will be okay, I think, John. Yeah.
Harding, and I'm going to be your tour guide this afternoon for the 4th annual Oakwood Walking Show. Can't believe it's been a year since we were out here. Our tour today, as always, is sponsored by the Iron Horse Historical Society and the Parsons Sun. And we've got a show for you. Little business to get out of the way first. One other thing that I want to bring up is that we would like to dedicate our tour this afternoon to the men and women in our armed forces that are in Saudi Arabia. And we wish them Godspeed and safety to come home. The Civil War, a long time ago. It was called a lot of things. The event that changed the course of American history, or the great American tragedy would be more appropriate. 620,000 young men lost their lives in that war. More than all other wars we've been in put together. 2% of our population. Over 200,000 of those young men died of disease and infection. It's been a long time since that war, but strangely enough, it's not forgotten. The Civil War was over in April of 1865, and this is important to us here in the Valley to know, because the following September, just about 20 miles north of here, a treaty between the Osage Indians of our valley and our government was signed. And one of the articles of this treaty pertains to us. This article stated that you could buy 160 acres of land for $1.25 an acre. Now the reason that's important to us is that when that war was over, there were thousands of young men that were looking for a new world, a new place to start all over. And here they come. This was their place. And as the years went by and they died here in the valley, they were buried in this old cemetery. 371 of them, from 18 states and 2 territories. 5 Confederate soldiers that we know of. And the reason I say that we know of, unfortunately, when Grandpa died, it wasn't the popular thing to say here that he had served in the Confederate Army. So many times there was no mention made of this. But today we would like to honor some of those soldiers and sailors from both sides. And we hope that you enjoy your afternoon. You know, throughout our history, spiritual music has always been important to us. There's an old song that just keeps coming back generation after generation after generation. Let me see if you know what this song is. Okay?
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already come. 'Tis grace hath shining as the sun. We've no less days to sing God's praise than when we first begun.
Miss Kay Lawrence, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Kay. I mentioned that we had 5 Confederate soldiers buried at Oakwood that we know of. John Short was very interesting to me, our Confederate today. But here's Miss Susan Horner. She knows a lot more about him than I do.
John Short was born and raised in Floyd County, Virginia. When the Civil War began in 1861, Virginia seceded from the Union. And then John enlisted in the Confederate Army of the United States. He was 21 years old. He can be considered in every sense of the word a veteran of the Civil War. For 3 years and 9 months, he fought under the banner of the South. He served under the famous General Joe Johnston in some of the most famous battles of the war, some of the most important battles. 2 of the hardest battles in which he fought were Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge, November 24th and 25th of 1863. Confederate losses in these battles were 361 killed, 2,181 wounded, and 6,142 missing. He went through almost the entire war and was wounded only once. Later, he was captured by Union soldiers and was for several months a prisoner of war at Rock Island, Illinois. When the war ended, he returned to his native Virginia and his wife, Melvina. In 1882, Mr. Short moved with his family to Kansas to a land claim near Edna. He farmed that land until 1890, when he moved into Parsons at 2531 Oak. He went to work for the Katy Railroad as a machinist in the back shops, and he retired from that job in 1921. He was 81 years old. John and Melvina were married in Virginia in 1860. They were the parents of 4 sons and 3 daughters. They were married for 67 years. On May 13th, 1927, final taps were played for the last Confederate soldier in Parsons.
Thank you, Susan. Very nice presentation. Now, if you'll all just let me get ahead of you a little bit, okay? Let's go around.
Okay, here we go.
Do we have any students from the Parsons High School here today? Are there some back? Yes, yes, I see one of the teachers here, Mary. Nice to see you. The legal draft age to start the Civil War, Mary, was age 18 to 25. However, there were over 100,000 men in the Union Army from age 15 to 17, Crystal. Many thousands from age 9 to 15. Our Sam Holliday, that Virginia Prather's going to tell us about, was 17 when he joined the Army.
Thank you, Maynard. It's nice to see you this afternoon. We're here today to honor Mr. Samuel R. Halliday. He was born in 1844 in Meigs County, Ohio. His parents had come from Scotland to this area of the country at an early time. He grew from boyhood to manhood here in Ohio, and upon the Civil War starting in 1861, he enlisted in Company J, 53rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry. He was 17 years of age at his joining. He served in this capacity until 1863 when he was discharged, whereupon he re-entered the Union Army in Company G, 116th Infantry, Ohio, with General Sherman. General Sherman was on his way to West Virginia, and in September 1864, Samuel suffered an injury to his left leg in the Battle of Winchester. For this injury to his leg, he received a pension of $4 per month for the rest of his life. The Battle of Winchester was a major campaign, and it had the loss of 693 Union soldiers in death and over 4,000 Union soldiers injured. The Confederates lost heavily also. They lost 3,250 men in both killed and wounded. At the end of the war, Mr. Halliday went back to Ohio. He married, and in 1869 he moved to Parsons, Kansas. He and his wife bought a 160-acre farm in North Township for $1.25 an acre. They had 4 children here in Parsons, and he lived the rest of his life in this area, and he died in September of 1926. His wife, Emma, lies beside him. Thank you.
Miss Virginia Prather.
I think they're gonna be working on the north side now. Let's see through this next year.
Pardon us, please. Hey, how you doing? Beep, beep. Hello there. Pardon us, call. Pardon us, sir. Just a little. Thank you. Okay, let's crank her around out here. How's that?
Those good-looking boys. Our city was founded as a railroad community, and our next Union soldier was quite a railroader, to say the least. Here's Miss Therese Flynn.
Thank you, Maynard. This afternoon, we will be honoring DeWitt C. Perry. Mr. Perry was born in Canton, New York, where he grew to manhood. He enlisted in Company A, 60th New York Infantry in September of 1861 and served with that unit until August of 1865, participating in several major campaigns. He was promoted from private to sergeant and then to lieutenant. After the war, he returned to his home. In 1866, he married Lottie A. Slora in Norfolk, New York. They had one son, George, and an adopted daughter, Tinia. Lottie Perry died in 1885. Mr. Perry left New York State in 1870 for South America, where he spent 6 years building railroads. He was an officer in the Meeks Company, which was responsible for building a long tunnel through the Andes Mountains in the early 1870s. Mr. Perry moved to Parsons in August of 1876 as a roadmaster for the Katy Railroad. He remained with the Katy through 1887. During that time, he took an active part in the construction of the Katy lines from Parsons to Coffeyville and from Parsons to Paola. From the Katy, Mr. Perry went to work for the Oregon Short Line Railroad, where he was with that company until the start of the St. Louis World's Fair in 1903, when he was appointed landscape gardener for the World's Fair. Landscaping was a hobby he had pursued all of his adult life. Mr. Perry returned to Parsons in 1913 to be near his son George after he retired. He was manager of the Kimball Hotel here in Parsons and was living there at the time of his death, September the 25th, 1914.
Miss 3 Splint. How many are here for the first Oakwood tour today? How many are newcomers? Bless your hearts. Can I kiss all of you? Thank you. Appreciate you coming. A lot of old friends here too, Doc. Good to see you. This next soldier we're going to talk about was not only an interesting man in his own right, but wait till you hear about his commanding officer.
Today we are honoring Robert Alexander Weir. Mr. Weir was born and grew to manhood in Sullivan County, Indiana. He received his education in the schools of New Lebanon. In 1863, at the age of 27, he enlisted in the Union Army, Company G, the 11th Indiana Infantry. He enlisted as a sergeant, earning the rank of first lieutenant in 1865. Mr. Weir was with his company at the sieges of Vicksburg, Frankfort, and Corinth. He may have been wounded at the Battle of Frankfort because in December 1864 he was in a Nashville hospital. The 11th Indiana Infantry was mustered in on April 16, 1861, and saw action in practically every significant battle down the Mississippi and Tennessee River valleys. It was located in the Shenandoah Valley from 1864 until the end of the war. The 11th Indiana was commanded by Colonel Lewis Wallace. This is the Lew Wallace who wrote Ben-Hur after the war. It is said that the Battle of Shiloh was one of his inspirations for the book. The 11th Indiana was trained and uniformed to resemble Napoleon's Zouaves. The colorful uniforms had a significant influence on the ladies' and children's fashions of the period. In the ladies' Godey's books of the period, you will find pages filled with the fashionable Zouave jackets and hats. At the close of the war, Mr. Weir returned to Indiana, where he farmed for 5 years. He then moved to Neosho County, Kansas in 1870 and purchased a land claim on the Labette County line. He worked the claim until 1876 when he moved into Parsons and worked as a stonemason until 1884. At that time, he entered the real estate business and continued that interest until his death. Mr. Weir married Mary E. Martz. She died in 1886. He then married Elizabeth Clark. At the time of his death, he was survived by his third wife, Emmeline, who happened to be the sister of Mary, his first wife. For 24 years, Mr. Weir lived at 721 North Lincoln. In 1900, he moved to 1715 Washington, and in 1909, he moved to 1607 Crawford, where he was living at the time of his death on March 29, 1910.
That's Solid Unblad, ladies and gentlemen. The lovely lady at the graveside is Miss Joan Ray. Now, we're going to come down this road here. Okay.
Pardon us.
During the course of the Civil War, we developed a Navy. Most people, when they think of the Civil War, don't even know that we had a Navy. But the Navy became a very important tool for the Union. Here's Miss June Crabtree to tell us about one of those sailors.
Ezekiel Giles was born in New Jersey. He joined the Union Navy at the age of 18 and served on the USS Chippewa. Now, at the first of the war, the U.S. naval fleet consisted of any ragtag, worn boat that could possibly float and carry a gun. But as the war continued, they built 24 500-ton gunboats, and the Chippewa was one of the new boats that was built. Probably the most important battle that Chippewa and Mr. Giles saw was the one that was fought at Fort Wagner, Morris Island, South Carolina. This battle started in July of 1863 and continued until September of 1863. The Union Army suffered grave losses. They lost 1,700 men. The Confederates only lost 571. All the gunboats were used to blockade as blockades for the southern ports. Mr. Giles continued his service on the Chippewa until the end of his enlistment period. At that time, he returned to New Jersey and married Josephine. They came to Parsons in the late 1870s. By 1881, they had purchased a home at 1720 Appleton. Mr. Giles was a paint contractor and a brick mason. They lived at that address until his death, which was March the 28th, 1928, at the age of 84.
Give June Crabtree a nice hand. Miss Glenda Kaler. All right, we're just going to go down to the corner. I wonder if anybody could tell me how old this oak tree is here, Pete. Is that as old as you are? No, it's really not. Oh my, they get prettier all the time. Do you notice that?
The oak trees you still talking?
Yeah, I'm talking about the oak trees, of course.
Okay, let's swing around.
See some new friends today. Glad to have you. Jonathan Weaver was a real soldier. He just about did it all. Didn't he, Carol?
Good afternoon. I'm here this afternoon to honor the memory of Jonathan T. Weaver. He was born in Wayne County, Indiana in 1840 and passed the early years of his life there. On July 26th of 1862, at 22 years of age, Jonathan Weaver enlisted in Company D of the 69th Indiana Infantry. He was under the command of Joseph R. Jackson. He was engaged in the battles at Richmond, Kentucky, Haynes Bluff, Chickasaw Bayou, Mississippi, and at Arkansas Post and Fort Gibson during the siege at Vicksburg. On May 24th of 1863, he was captured by Confederate soldiers and taken prisoner. He was held prisoner at Libby Prison in Richmond, Virginia, until October 1st of 1863, at which time he was released during the prisoner exchange. He was then returned to his command. After the campaign at Vicksburg, he served in the Red River Expedition under General Banks. And he was mustered out of service in Mobile, Alabama, February 20th, 1866. At the time of his discharge, he returned then to Indiana and married Lizzie Ensor. They moved to Parsons, Kansas in 1885, where Mr. Weaver served as a gardener. They lived at 1319 Crawford for most of the years of their life in Parsons. In July 1st, 1910, at age 70, Jonathan T. Weaver died, leaving his wife Lizzie and daughter Pearl.
Miss Carol Bush with a very nice and difficult presentation. Now, if the waters would part, right about. Vince, I can see you clear down here. Prisoners of war. When most of us think of prisoners of war, we think more of a modern day period. We think of POWs or concentration camps or MIAs. But the Civil War, the prisoner of war had a serious problem. Here's Miss Jan Chubb with Prisoners of War.
During the course of the Civil War, more than 400,000 men were held as prisoners for periods ranging from days to years. At the beginning of the war, no suitable provision was made for prisoners. Naturally, a South which did not believe there would be a war, and therefore did not adequately provide for one, made no preparation for the care of prisoners. A North which believed that the South would be defeated within 90 days saw little need of facilities for prisoners. As the war began in earnest, the job of organizing and equipping the fighting men engrossed the attention of both sides. There was no preparation made for prisoners of war. The thousands of volunteers, officers, and enlisted men who made up the armies in the years 1861 to 1865 brought with them varying ideas and ideals and diverse standards of justice. They captured the prisoners and for the most part had charge of them. They interpreted the rules for their care and treatment. It is difficult at this point in time to judge which side was more inhumane to its prisoners. We can certainly find examples of torture, starvation, and death caused by imprisonment in both Union and Confederate prisons. One of the most famous and feared prisons was the Confederate facility Libby, located in Richmond, Virginia. It was actually a tobacco warehouse, and few amenities were provided. Sanitary conditions here were appalling. The men were crowded into the rooms in such numbers that there was barely room for them to lie down. Prisoners received 2 meals a day, consisting of beef and bread. Often their food was tainted. They were not allowed to purchase any items to ease their suffering. The men passed the time by pacing, playing cards and checkers, sleeping, and of course talking of home and of possible release from prison. No outdoor exercise was permitted. If the prisoners stood too near the windows, the sentries fired on them. The first Union compound built specifically for prisoners of war was on Johnson's Island, 2.5 miles offshore from Sandusky, Ohio, in Lake Erie. It opened in early 1862, built for a maximum capacity of 1,000 prisoners. As the war escalated, it became hopelessly overcrowded. The Southern prisoners, unused to severe winter weather, suffered from the winds which blew through the barracks. The clothing of the Confederates was totally inadequate to protect them against a winter on Lake Erie. On New Year's Day, 1864, it was so cold that many prisoners froze to death. Confederate Major Henry Kidd Douglas reported that Johnson's Island was just the place to convert visitors to the theological belief that hell had torments of cold instead of heat. Food and water here were comparable to that given prisoners in the South. The men learned to eat quickly for fear the rations would be stolen. Sanitation in the barracks was virtually non-existent, and many men fell victim to disease. Medical care was primitive, and hospitals were poorly staffed and equipped. Some prisoners feared the hospital more than the disease for which they were to be treated. By the end of the war, more than 30,000 Union prisoners had perished. Almost 26,000 captured Confederates died. Many more were disabled, either mentally or physically, due to the negligent and often inhumane treatment to which they were subjected. It was truly a sad and shameful chapter in our history.
Miss Jan Chubb, let's have a nice hand for that presentation. Can I borrow your chair for just a little bit? Black soldiers in the Civil War, Lonnie. 178,000 young black men served in the Union Army in the Civil War. 37,000 of them gave their lives. Most of these young men were either freed slaves or runaway slaves. Were they good soldiers? Yes, they were. 24 of those young men won the Congressional Medal of Honor. We have 10 black soldiers at Oakwood. But today we would like to tell you about one, James French.
Today, we are honoring James W. French. James W. French was born in Kentucky in 1842 and grew to manhood in that state. On June 9, 1864, Mr. French enlisted in Company A of the 109th United States Colored Infantry and was mustered in at Greenupsburg, Kentucky. Mr. French served with distinction and honor during the Civil War. In fact, at the time of his discharge, he had achieved the rank of First Sergeant of Company A. James and Tuscarora French came to Parsons in the early 1870s and built a home at 1809 Clark. They lived and raised a family in that home. They had 3 daughters and 2 sons. Tuscarora French died April 22nd, 1913. Mr. French was a brick mason, and plaster contractor all of the years that he lived in Parsons. In fact, one of his greatest achievements was when he was elected Labette County Coroner in 1895. In September 1919, Mr. French attended the Grand Army Reunion of Old Soldiers at Columbus, Ohio. On his return, he stopped in Chicago to visit at the home of his daughter. He took ill and died at the home of his daughter on September 23rd, 1919. He was buried here at Oakwood on September 27th, 1919. Services were conducted by Reverend French. He was survived by his wife.
Jackie Payne and the Lily Alliance, ladies and gentlemen, and Mary Stanton. When we started this to research this tour on June the 1st, a well-meaning friend said, "Maynard, don't you think you pretty well got all the stories out of Oakwood?" I don't think we did. Now, let's see, I need to get, where's the alley at, Mike? Right there. Let me get ahead of you a minute. Thank you again, ladies.
Pardon us, please.
You probably heard a lot of patriotic music over your lifetime, but I'll bet you have never heard the Labette Creek Crooners do this song.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly
Maynard. On my far left, singing bass, Gordon McDonald. Next to him on baritone, Pete Hughes. On my right, singing first tenor, Marlon Hoffman. And on my right, Andy Horner.
Now, no wife abuse. I'm not getting you with this number.
Pardon me? Pardon me, please. Come through. Pardon me, please.
Oh, excuse me.
Pardon me. Where's
We just got through talking about prisoners of war. And here's Miss Melissa Malone to tell us about young Philip John.
Today we are honoring Philip John. Mr. John was born on December 2nd, 1827 in Richland County, Ohio. There he grew to manhood and received a common school education in his native county. In 1857, Mr. John married Sarah M. Watts, a native of the same county. She was born on February 2nd, 1834. They had 5 children, 4 sons and 1 daughter. In 1863, Mr. John joined Company F, 19th Indiana Volunteer Infantry. He served 3 years. In 1864, at the Siege of Vicksburg, he suffered an injury and lost his left eye. He received a pension of this loss at $12 a month. While at the Siege of Vicksburg, Mr. John was taken a prisoner of war, but was released 2 weeks later in an exchange of prisoners. At Vicksburg, Union forces suffered the loss of 4,536 killed, wounded, and missing, while the Confederate forces suffered the loss of 21,744 killed, wounded, and missing. The John family came to Labette County in 1884. They settled at North Township east of Parsons. They moved into Parsons later on and settled at 1631 Chess. Mrs. John, died in the home on December 2nd, 1891, and Mr. John later died on June 1st, 1908 at his home. Surviving him was his second wife, Miranda, and 2 daughters. At the time of his death, Mr. John was 80 years, 5 months, and 29 days old.
Melissa Malone and Bonnie Simpson back at the graveside, ladies and gentlemen. Melissa was elected one of our homecoming queens Friday night. I thought you all know that. Very good, Melissa. She told me she didn't remember a line. Let's go on around to the corner and then go to your left. Your other left, yeah. I'll borrow your hat sometime, Gene. That let me know. Well, Bobby, if you had a street named after you, that'd be pretty good, wouldn't it? Well, here's Miss Cindy Jackson about Dr. Heacock.
Today we're honoring Dr. James Heacock. Dr. James Heacock was born in Columbiana County, Ohio on July 29th of 1842. He received his elementary education in Meigs County, Ohio, and began the study of medicine at the amazing age of 14. In April of 1863, James Heacock enlisted in the 7th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. 3 months later, he re-enlisted, this time with the 15th Ohio Volunteer Infantry. Later on, he was transferred to the 7th Ohio Battery of Light Artillery. Now, he served as a clerk in this capacity with his battery until he was discharged. That was on August 11th of 1865. During his time in the service, he was participating in the engagements at the battles of Island, North 10, as well as the siege of Vicksburg, Mississippi. Mr. Heacock moved to Lebec County in 1869. In October of that year, he settled on a land claim that was 5.5 miles northeast of Parsons. This was located in the North Township. During the years 1871 and 1872, Mr. Heacock attended a series of lectures at St. Louis Homeopathic Medical College, and thereupon he received his degree. After this, Dr. Heacock resided on his farm, which was an amazing piece of property. He was continually making improvements on this land, at the same time being engaged in his medical practice. In 1882, he took a position as a surgeon with the North Pacific Railroad. He was there approximately 2.5 years. Then, at which time in 1885, he located in Parsons at 26th and Northern Boulevard. Now, during this same year, Mr. Heacock sold his property. And as I said before, it was an amazing piece of land. Some of the amenities was that it had a 40-acre orchard and a 3-story brick house. The property sold for an astonishing $20,000. Dr. Heacock practiced medicine in Parsons and Lebec County for many years. He was very well known and was one of the very few doctors available in the early days. He rode constantly night and day, ministering to the wants and needs, as well as relieving the suffering of the early pioneers. Dr. James Heacock passed away in September of 1917. He was survived by his wife Anna, 4 daughters, 2 sons, and he was 75 years old.
Miss Cindy Jackson, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take a 10-minute break here. The refreshment stand is set right up behind you over there. And we're going to do our service at the GAR circles in just 10 minutes.
Ready? Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Aim. Fire. Half left. Two. Breathe in. 4.
gifts of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. I have seen him in the watchfires of 100 circling camps. They have builded him an altar in the evening dews and damps. I can read his righteous sentence by the dim and flaring lamps. His day is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. He has sounded forth the trumpet that shall never call retreat. He is sifting out the hearts of men before his judgment seat. Oh, be swift, my soul, to answer him. Be jubilant, my feet. Our God is marching on. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on.
Could we have a nice hand for everyone involved in this program? You got a great group. I appreciate you coming this afternoon, and I hope you've enjoyed this half as much as we have in presenting the speech. This is our 9th historic tour of Parsons, and I suspect that's probably enough. Well, what do you should say? Next May of 1990, Belmont Avenue. Here we go again. Bless you, man. It has taken 75 people to put on our tour this afternoon, but we need a few more. If you were looking for something to do, call me, will you? Now, there's some people here that we need to recognize, though. They work every year in this tour. The United States Army Reserve, their men and women are here today, and we are glad they are here instead of somewhere else. Our Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, and especially to our Veterans Association in Parsons. They do a lot of work for this tour. And of course, the actors, and all of the technical people, and the video staff. It's just amazing how many people take to do this. Come and join us for Belmont. Just call me. Either I'll find something for you. We thank you very much.
Get feedback from the earphones from the daggone mic. I get too close to that mic and I get feedback from the earphones. I didn't want to get close to that mic.